Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my LEC Group Stage Round 2 overview and analysis. It's time to finally find out who is going to lock their spots in the playoffs. We already have 2 of the 4 teams confirmed due to last week, week number 1 of groups. You can check out that video up in the iCard right now if you have not seen it. 2 teams have already qualified, 1 from Group A, 1 from Group B. These 4 series in this video will go ahead and determine who is going to be the final 2 teams that qualify, joining G2 and Koi in that playoff bracket. A lot of really good games over the LEC season. This new format has been very exciting for a lot of fans. I know a lot of people are really enjoying it. Of course, scheduling-wise, it's a little bit weird, obviously, having this round end right before the beginning of the next round the next day, but here we are, making sure that this content gets out on time. If you are enjoying it, let me know down in the comment section below. What series were you most looking forward to in this stage of groups? Obviously, a lot of really interesting matchups on paper, not only when it came to the teams, but specific lane matchups that I was really excited for. Talked a bit about them in the previous video. There were a lot of fun things to discuss, so let's not waste too much time. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. If you are not familiar with how I cover things on this channel, it is going to be obviously a little bit different for this because it's not a regular season, quote-unquote, kind of game here, more obviously of a group stage one. What I'm going to be doing is covering each group back to back, and so I will be covering both series in Group A first, and then I will be covering both series in Group B. I know that's not chronologically how they go, but I think it's a little bit easier to follow when you just get all of Group A, so you can kind of get an idea of where that is, and then all of Group B, so you can kind of get an idea of what that is. So we're going to be going over all 4 series. I'll be giving my player of the series and my dud of the series, talking about where each team went right, where each team went wrong, and what it could mean for potential future series. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our Group A games. And we kicked off Group A, obviously, we're starting both of these groups with the 2 teams that lost their best of 3s earlier on in week 1 of the group stage. So, kicking that off for Group A, it's the number 3 seeded SK Gaming versus the number 6 seeded Team Heretics. Winner goes on, loser goes home, and SK Gaming win the series 2-0 in 2. I have pretty much been high on SK ever since they started breaking out throughout the year. I think that their bot lane is legit, like top of the league legit. I think Marcoon has been playing at a high level. I think Certus has gotten better. This is a team that really does feel like a genuine contender. I was talking about that a bit last week. I know a lot of people are writing them off because they're not an organization that was supposed to be good going into the year. I saw a lot of people, I think most people actually picking Heretics in this one, but obviously last week you guys know I picked SK to come out on top relatively efficiently here, and that's basically exactly what happened. They were better in both games, and it definitely proved, the point that SK is not a team you can take lightly. They really are not a pushover like a lot of people might expect them to be, considering what they were supposed to be going into the year. I'll say this for Heretics really quickly. Obviously, this game was not on stage. Heretics was sick. Ruby has COVID. As far as I'm aware, he's the only one to have COVID, but with Ruby being sick, SK end up not playing on stage as well. Not sure if that benefits or hinders either team. I'm just pointing that out. Ruby obviously being sick might come into play in my analysis because he had a series, which we will get to, but let's talk about SK Gaming first because I do think that there are some really good things to talk about. This team really has just clicked on a different level. You can talk about players that have really over-exceeded expectations. Obviously, everyone's mind is going to go to Exakick first and foremost on that. 2 games of Zeri here. They get the Zeri Lulu trade in both games, and they feel comfortable with that. They feel comfortable with the Zeri Lulu on their side going into the Lucian Nami, which isn't particularly surprising. We've seen Zeri and Lulu do a lot better in recent weeks. This was something that was very Lucian favored last year and going into the beginning of this year, but it feels like Zeri is in a more comfortable spot, at least in terms of the people that are currently playing her, and so we've seen her win rate rise a bit. Exakick feels very comfortable going to that in both games, supplemented very much by what we ended up seeing in a lot of late summer last year, things like Sejuani and Vi in the jungle, and then shove and row mids that can skirmish in the mid game, things like the Talia, things like the Silas. That's what SK really wanted to go to in this series, and they played it really well. Honestly, my player of the series is going to go to Certus in the mid lane. Really good series from him overall. He absolutely destroyed Ruby in the mid lane matchup, not only in terms of what he was able to accomplish in the 1v1, but more notably what he was able to accomplish around the map as opposed to his mid lane counterpart, where that shove and run mentality really benefited SK, really pushed them forward. Marcoon had so much jungle pressure because often it was a lot of 2v2 engages that Ruby was just not able to follow up on, or he was late to, or whatever, you know, something or another. They were always in a situation where SK had control of the jungle matchup. Marcoon did a really good job of being able to, you know, pressure early into something like a Graves or a Kindred, something that you really don't want to let snowball out of control, and then they did a really good job being able to execute from there. But credit to Certus, it feels like he gets better every single game, and that's incredibly impressive. I've always been a little bit higher, I would say, on Certus than maybe like your average analyst, and I think this series was obviously really solid for him. You could argue that Ruby played bad more than Certus played good. I would disagree with that, but I understand where people are coming from in that debate. I still think you have to play well at an LEC level in order to, you know, look like this. It can't just be your opponent playing bad. You do have to capitalize on the mistakes. It's not quite as simple, but you know, maybe not the hardest series of all time for the mid laner. Marcoon is the other player I really want to shout out. I already talked about him a bit. He did a really good job in the early game being able to generate that pressure on picks like Sedge and Vi that you really need to into these marksmen, because you do not want to let them start snowballing. Looking at the comp for Heretics, if they were able to get online in either of these games, if you were able to hit that big benchmark and be able to generate even remotely like a small lead with something like Jax Graves Azir or even Cassante Kindred Azir, you know, moving Lucian into the mid game, if you're able to generate that lead, that's a very difficult comp to actually do anything into, because they should have a ton of control around, you know, major choke points, and you certainly don't want to fight them front to back because they're basically going to win that every time. But SK did a really good job in the early game, understanding that they didn't want to let it get to that point, and making sure that Marcoon had the freedom and the ability to be able to play aggressive. I think that was a big positive for the SK laners, and Marcoon did a really good job taking advantage of that as well. I think this jungle mid duo, in my opinion, has been the most surprisingly positive side of SK. Yeah, I like Marcoon. I've liked Marcoon for a very long time. That's certainly not a secret on this channel. I put him in my All-Pro basically every year he's been in the LEC. Thought he was the best player on Excel last year. But to see him being able to gel with Certus and them being a really strong jungle mid duo and having really nice chemistry together, I think that's what really steps SK over the top. Xkick and DOS are obviously fantastic, and they basically won almost every single 2v2 that they've played the entire year, but a bot lane does not make a good team by itself in the LEC right now. You have to have other players, and that's what SK has. As for Heretics, frustrating loss here. This does officially eliminate you from the winter split here in 2023. Not particularly surprising. This is the exact team that I have been talking about all year long. We knew exactly who Heretics was. It's a team that I think really could take advantage of the other teams that were struggling in the league. Fnatic, Excel, you know, Astralis at points in time. These, you know, Koi, these are the organizations that Heretics was able to take advantage of and be able to beat because they weren't necessarily playing on that level. They're kind of the gatekeepers, if you will. I think most regions have a team like this that is going to beat the teams that are struggling and struggle against the teams that are actually good. That just feels like Heretics. They don't have any top-level talent that's going to be able to push them forward, carry a lot of their, I don't want to say mid-tier players because that feels disrespectful to players like Yankos, but, you know, it's not, this isn't a team full of superstars. They're not as talented as a team like SK. They don't have a player like Xkick. They don't have a player like Marcoon on this team, and so, you know, this kind of played out exactly as expected. They just weren't very good. Ruby is going to get my dud of the series. That's no surprise to anybody who watched these games. I mean, he was atrocious in terms of positioning. He was super far down in the mid lane 1v1, which is pretty unacceptable against a Sylas and a Talia, where you need to be pressuring early so that they at least feel like they're losing something by leaving lane. That's not really what happened in this series. And then just a ton of mechanical misplays. Obviously, he was sick, so I'm not going to sit here and say that this is some unforeseen, unprecedented circumstance, but it's just got to be frustrating for Heretics to have your entire season kind of depend on your mid laner stepping up and have it not really working out. Yankos played two really aggressive champions. It never really came back to be positive for him at all in this series. Talked about it a bit on the channel. Marksmen in the jungle can be very proactive right now, but I really do think you need to play around them in a different kind of way. I just don't know if this is the Heretics playstyle that I want to see them go to. Yankos being the primary resource getter is not something that has really ever been on the table as a serious option for him in his career, because he's just so good at being able to enable his laners that, you know, putting him on Graves, putting him on Kindred, two very high resource junglers, and hoping that you can get into the late game just didn't feel like a very sustainable strategy to me for having this team win. I would have wanted to see a little bit more of a maybe supportive jungler, obviously, but something that can invest more into the bottom lane, because Jack and Mursa, certainly aren't consistent. And when they win, this team looks good. When they lose, this team looks bad. I think if you were able to get them in a position where they felt a little bit more comfortable by 10, 15 minutes to skirmish, I actually think, the series could be a little bit different. But you just weren't in that position. You invested a lot into your jungle position, who was behind, weren't able to do much. Jack was doing damage, but at the end of the day, he wasn't going to be able to outdo Exekick and DOS, who were really, really solid in lane. Evie's on tanks, especially in game number 2. Not really a lot of ways for Heretics to win when your mid jungle is losing in the way that they did. And so, unfortunately, Heretics is eliminated. They're right in that, 7th, 8th place. That's exactly where I expected them to be. I had them as the number 7 team, I think, the entirety of the split. I don't think I moved them from number 7 a single week of the split, and I think that's basically where they ended up, right? A team that's right outside the top 6, not really competitive at the same level as some of those other teams, but not necessarily a team that's bad by any means. Just, you're looking at a team like SK, and they really have unlocked a lot of their young talent. A lot of things have come together for them. Heretics hasn't really had that. As for SK, obviously, we'll talk about them in just a second, because we're going to go over their next series right after this, but you just got to be super excited for a team that a lot of people had question marks about at the beginning of the year. Obviously, I was pretty positive on them going into the year. I had them at number 8 in my power rankings, but I did talk about how I thought that they definitely could be 5 or 6 in that same category as a team like Heretics. It is phenomenal to see them even blow away my expectations. I never could have expected them to play this good, and now they have a real shot for top 4. And I guess we'll see now if SK can make that top 4 dream come true, as they only have to win one more best of 3 against the loser of last week's Make It In game between Vitality and Koi. We had Team Vitality taking on SK Gaming, and SK wins it 2-0. They don't drop a single game against the number 1 team in the regular season. They punch their ticket into the top 4, and they eliminate Team Vitality from the LEC Winter Split. An unbelievable turn of events. I would have thought the Vitality would have at least pulled one game out, but this was SK all the way. I mean, game number 1 wasn't particularly SK all the way. Vitality certainly had moments in that game that they should have won. A really good early game coming out from Bo, but they just had absolutely no damage coming out towards the back half of that game. I've been praising Photon a lot on this channel. He is, quite frankly, my favorite to win MVP in the LEC for the Winter Split, but he was garbage in game number 1. He truly was bad. I mean, a lot of it was on his shoulders. You're looking at the comp, you're looking at Silas and Varus. You need that Gangplank to be able to pop off once you hit that 40-minute mark in order for these team fights to be at least a little bit more efficient, and Photon was bad. Those were some of the worst Gangplank ults I've ever seen. Bo obviously wasn't all that useful towards the back half. Neon wasn't really doing damage. Perks was awful on the Silas. We'll get into it. It was even worse in game number 2 for Vitality, but credit to SK for keeping their mental, being able to come back in that game. Marcoon played really well in game number 1, but so did Exekick. Without that Zeri, it's going to be very difficult for them to win this series at all. And then you jump into game number 2. Game number 1, close, back and forth. Vitality not able to hold their mental in, which we'll get to in a bit. SK, having very good mental, being able to kind of outlast them. Game number 2, that was never more apparent. This was a demolition on the side of SK Gaming, and it's hard really to be anything but proud of this SK team. My player of the series is going to go to Exekick. You could give this to Certus. You could give this to DOS. You could give this to Marcoon. Even Irrelevant played really well in the top lane. I would say that he outplayed the MVP frontrunner in the LEC right now in Photon, and that really just shows you how good SK Gaming is right now. They just click on a level that a lot of other teams are just not clicking on. I don't think that they're perfect, which we'll get into, obviously, at the end of the video when I maybe give some of my predictions for top 4, but right now, like, going up against Team Vitality, and a team that really struggles with cohesion. Maybe they're incredibly talented, but they may not have the same level of togetherness that a team like SK has. It really just shows how much these players have developed together, and I think it's just a really positive thing overall. You can't give Exekick these carries. He's just going to dominate on them. Zeri has been a huge pick for SK Gaming all split long, obviously. It was in the previous series. He played both games on Zeri. He dominated there. He got game 1 on Zeri. He was able to pop off in the end of these team fights and basically win SK the game. And then game number 2, he just gets so ridiculously turbo-fed on the Draven that it's basically game over there. It's not just him. DOS has been phenomenal. This was kind of the thing I was most concerned about for SK going into the year, was they really wanted Exekick, and in order to seal that deal, it felt like they brought DOS in order to, bring him in over, him going to Fnatic or something like that, or another team that might be interested. I was worried about DOS being an LEC level player and not just like, someone who was there to make Exekick happy. But obviously he knew best, because these two work together incredibly well. DOS has genuinely been one of the best supports in Europe over the years so far, and they've just been incredibly impressive. You could make a really strong case, and it's a case, honestly, that I would make at this point, that they are the best bot lane in the LEC right now. Obviously, talent-wise, there are a lot of bot lanes that I think you could compete for that role, but the way that XKick and DOS are performing on stage right now, it's insane and it's very impressive. Certus was spectacular in this series, completely destroyed Perks in the mid lane matchup. Game number 1 on Cassio, he ends up getting to a point where he's just going to be able to outscale the Silas, and then game number 2 on the Ahri, he just has a phenomenal early game. Again, Certus doing what he does best, which is playing with his jungler, playing with his team, and really being able to enable a lot of these plays that they want to make. Overall, Marcoon was awesome. He dominated the Karthus in game number 2. Obviously, Karthus a very bold pick to pull out in a winner-go-home scenario in the winter split, but Bo does that, and he dies over and over again. Marcoon doing a really good job tracking him in that game and doing a good job to make sure that Karthus can never get the ball rolling. Karthus Tristana can be very scary, especially when you have the Zeri, for these late game team fights, but not allowing them to get there is easily the best way to win that, and so overall, SK basically did everything that they needed to in both of these games. Game number 1, they just needed to hang on, make sure they got to their late game power spikes, and win late game team fights in a comp where it's really, definitely possible for them to win late game team fights. And then game number 2, they just needed to make sure the opposite didn't happen, that the game didn't go too late. They were able to push their advantages early, and they got it done with the Draven. Overall, just an incredibly impressive showing from SK, knowing your win conditions and knowing how to play to them. This team is legitimate. As for Vitality, this is a disaster. I mean, you not being able to make top 4 is about as bad as this could possibly get. You were easily, in my opinion, the most dominant team in the regular season. We were looking at this top side as basically unbeatable through the first couple weeks. Obviously, they had dropped that game to SK in week number 2, but, going through 6 games, they were 5-1 after week 2, and it was like, oh, this team's real. Then they had some hiccups in the final week of the season. We saw them lose to Koi. We saw them, almost lose to Excel. Like, there were definitely some question marks, some red flags. Bo had a pretty poor week. Perks wasn't particularly fantastic either, but they had enough talent. Photon was good to be able to pull it through. Neon had some good team fights towards the back half, and then you hit playoffs and everything disintegrated. Group stage, I should say, and everything is disintegrated. They looked good against Heretics, but even then, they lost game 2. For real, they lost game 2 in that series, and then they got bodied by Koi, they got bodied by SK. I don't know what to make of this. I don't know what to say. Obviously, you just want this team to be a little bit more consistent. This is the most talented team in the LEC. Even now, not that they're eliminated, I don't feel like I'm crazy for saying that. This is, on paper, the most talented team in the LEC, but they do have their problems. Topside is super inefficient sometimes. Bo, in particular, when he loses, just loses harder than almost anybody in the entire league. We've talked about that a bit. That was a problem I thought I was worried about going into the year with the aggressive playstyle that he showed. That has come to fruition, and some. Perks really struggled down the stretch of the split, was really bad in this series in particular. Pulling out the Ego Tristana in game 2 along with the Karthus is not the move when your season's on the line, in my opinion. And then the one that everybody's going to point to, Neon and Kaiser, have really been a negative bot lane, I would say, overall. I would argue they're not top 6, they're not top 7. They really have not been good. Kaiser's going to get my dud of the series here. Those engagers are not working. There really is no other way to put it. Trying to play Alistar into Zeri, Lulu, Cassio, Jax, where are you going? What are you doing? You're going in and dying. You're not able to tank enough damage to survive a lot of this. The Leona in game number 2 with the Zeri honestly just makes Zeri worse, because Zeri doesn't need time. She needs shields. She needs protection, and Leona can't offer that. And so Kaiser's shortcomings, I think, as a supporter, really being shown on this team. Obviously, we've always known that he is an engaged, roam-oriented player first, but he was pretty good at the Enchanters last year. He just seems to have completely fallen off of them at the beginning of this year. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. Maybe he just feels like he wants to go back to comfort, and that comfort is obviously, Leona and Alistar and Nautilus and the picks that he's been playing, for the last couple of years, but it's just not working right now. Neon can't carry games. He's not the kind of player that can actively win you games. That's what I called at the beginning of the year. I know everyone was talking about Neon on Misfits last year, but I was always lower on Neon. Obviously, you can go check the tapes on that. I definitely pushed back on a lot of the Neon hype last year on Misfits. I was very high on VTO. I was very high on Irrelevant. I was very high on Mursa. I thought Neon was, at times, the 4th best player on that team, and I think his shortcomings are being shown here. He's a bad laner. There really is no other way to put it. He's just a bad laner, and we've known that for a while. His laning stats have never been good in the LEC. He's a really good team fighter if you can get him to that late game relatively even, but with the 80 carry upsurge that we've had in the LEC so far this year, I mean, the amount of bot lanes that have come in and been really, really solid, basically immediately, XKick and DOS definitely being one of them, I'm not surprised to see Neon falling down the rankings. He was always a good AD carry with some major shortcomings, and we've had a lot of great AD carries come into the league, and so Neon, Kaiser really struggling. When Perks and Bo are not playing well, when Photon's not playing well, I mean, this Vitality team has no shot of winning because they don't really have a secondary option, and that's really what we've seen. Hopefully, this is a wake-up call to them. They need to work on their communication. They need to work on their consistency. I'm not sure you're ever really going to get that with the way that this roster is constructed. Bo and Perks in particular are very high-variance players that can win you games by themselves and lose you games by themselves. That might just be what you get with Vitality and with this roster. You might take the good with the bad, but unfortunately in this series we got the bad and eliminated them from the winter split. As for SK Gaming, they're now into top 4. I mean, congratulations. If you would have told this team that they would be in top 4 after the winter split, they would be ecstatic, and you have the chance to go even further. Remember, they are good. Like, this is not some, like, oh, now they're in top 4 and they're going to lose to whoever they play against, yada, yada, yada. This team is legit. They can beat almost anybody in the league because we've seen them beat basically everybody in the league. They've beaten G2, they've beaten Vitality, they've beaten Koi, they've beaten everybody. So, there are a lot of good things to take away from SK Gaming. You just hope that they're going to be able to keep it up because right now, they genuinely look like a team that, at their best, could contend for an LEC title. Alright, now that we've got our Group A series out of the way, it's time to move over to Group B. We now know 3 of the 4 teams to be moving on to the top 4. Let's figure out the final one. We kicked it off, of course, here with the 2 teams that lost their first series in Group B, getting their last chance to put themselves into a position where they can make it. It is Team BDS taking on Astralis, and Astralis picks up the 2-1 series win. I did not see this one coming. I was pretty confident in BDS in this series, quite frankly. This was the one that I felt was the most of a lock this weekend, but that one was obviously wrong. BDS not able to get it done. They are able to take that first game. Nuke actually has a really good game on the Kassadin. He's able to get ahead. The Ezreal Karma is able to poke out the Caitlyn Lux and be able to generate a small lead there, and then Adam gets his signature Olaf in the top lane. There's really not a lot that Astralis can do, and BDS honestly walks pretty cleanly to a 1-0 win once that Kassadin gets super far ahead. Credit to Nuke. He played really, really well this series in particular, but game number 1 was definitely his. And then game number 2, a little bit more back and forth, I would say. Definitely Astralis favored. They were the better team by a large margin, but it wasn't exactly this, like, dominating performance. Really good game from Kabe and Jonghoon. They continue to be the strength and the strong point of Astralis. We'll get to that in a bit. And then you get to game number 3, a little bit of a blowout for Astralis, but a great game plan going into it. Adam picks his signature Olaf, and Astralis says, what if we just sat top lane all game? And they do that. They pick Kled, they pick Sejuani, they get the Kled super far ahead. Obviously, Finn's signature Kled pick, we've seen him pull it out for years and years, whether here in North America, wherever, right? It's his signature champion. He pulls it out against Adam here against his signature champion, or at least one of them, you know, with the Darius and everything. 1-1-3 spends his entire game topside. Adam gets super far behind. Sheo can do absolutely nothing to stop it. Kabe and Jonghoon win their bot lane matchup with Varus Nautilus, and then the game is over. Honestly, huge credit to Astralis for knowing their win conditions in a lot of these games, finding an avenue to be able to generate consistent leads and being able to play towards that. A lot of people are going to give player of the series to Finn in the top lane for that game 3 on the Kled, and I do think there is a strong case to be made that he was the best player in game number 3. I really don't even think it's all that close, to be honest. He was the best player in game number 3, but Finn had some trouble in game 1, and that definitely wasn't the catalyst, I would say, in game 2. I would argue that the one player who played awesome all 3 games, even the game they lost in game number 1, was Kabe in the bot lane. Obviously not perfect on the Caitlyn Lux. You want to be able to generate an early lead, but he certainly wasn't the problem. I thought Dior played pretty bad in game number 1 on the Silas. 1-1-3 got outplayed. Finn got outplayed. Kabe and Jonghoon were just part of the kind of overall experience, but games 2 and 3 were awesome for this bot lane that just continues to be the heart and soul of Astralis when they win these games. Without Kabe and Jonghoon, this team is just simply not where they are. I get that Finn was really good in game number 3, but yeah, without Kabe and Jonghoon, this team is in a lot of trouble. So credit to them. Kabe gets player of the series. He continues to kind of prove me wrong. I've been very low on Kabe for the last year or so. I know a lot of people have been very high on him. I think he has performed very well on Astralis. I'm not exactly sure that he would do similar things on like a top tier team. I've seen people, you know, considering putting him on a team like Fnatic or something like that. I don't know if he's necessarily the right fit for an organization and a team that really wants to compete for like top 3, top 4, but I might be being proven wrong there. I mean, he consistently outperforms my expectation of him. Him and Jonghoon are phenomenal as a bot lane duo. They genuinely just work together incredibly well. Jonghoon can play that really aggressive role, and Kabe can actually be a little bit more, I would say, controlled in how he plays the game. Honestly, my comparison for them, and this is going to sound a little bit weird, I don't think, you know, skill level-wise they're there, but just in terms of play style and how they play the game, I actually think it's very similar to the KT Rolster bot lane of aiming in Lehens. I think the way that they go about, you know, laning and playing in the mid game is very similar to how those two go about, where Lehens and Jonghoon are going to be very aggressive in how they want to make these plays, and Kabe is going to do a very good job of being consistent and making sure that he can get to that break point towards the back half of the game, where if need be, he can just be the win condition for the team. I think Astralis has found a very strong pathway to win games through that, and honestly, like, if they keep doing that, they're going to be much better than 8 in the LEC this split. I want to point out also BDS versus Astralis in a matchup in the group stage. These are the two teams that I think, me included, most people thought were just the worst two teams in the league. It's really cool to see them face off here. Really, really fun story. I do think that there were some negatives with Astralis, even though they won. Dior's scoreline looks good. I'm not exactly sure Dior played particularly well in the series. I would say Nuke was significantly better in the mid lane. Definitely, that's the one area where I would say BDS definitely stood out, where Astralis was a little bit worrisome. But outside of that, you know, Finn and 113 had their problems in game number 1. They were fine in game 2, and they were awesome in game number 3. So that's a good takeaway. Finn has been inconsistent at best, but when he works, when he's played well, you know, on the Gangplank, on the Kled, he is able to win games at an LEC level. That's very impressive. We've known he's been streaky. This is what he was on Excel. Last year, he had moments where he looked like the best player in the LEC during certain weeks, and some moments where he looked like the worst player in the LEC in certain weeks. That definitely has transitioned and carried over to Astralis. Hopefully, you're just going to get more of the good stuff that you've been getting over the past, you know, week or two for Astralis. He started the year poorly, but it feels like he's really ramped it up, and then Kabe and Junghoon just feel fantastic. They feel like they're going to be consistently one of the better bot lanes in the league. As for BDS, frustrating loss. This really was a series you probably went into feeling like you should win, and, you know, that was my perception of BDS going into this, is that they should win this. I thought that, obviously, Astralis needs their bot lane to win in order to succeed, and I honestly just thought the BDS bot lane was better this year. I thought Crowny and Lebrov, you know, for as good as Kabe and Junghoon were, Crowny and Lebrov were also great, and that kind of played out in game number 1. They play Ezreal Karma all 3 games here, but game number 1 looking really good on the Ezreal Karma, able to get that push in, and then the final 2 games, clearly they weren't prepped for Varus Ashe, or Varus really anybody. They didn't play into it particularly well. Huge credit to Nuke. I thought Nuke was really good in this series. It just did not matter. My dud of the series is going to go to Sheo. I think a lot of people are going to want to give this to Adam for his game number 3, but I can't stress this enough. He was really good in game number 1, and he was pretty solid in game number 2. Kind of irrelevantly good in game number 2 because the game just kind of spiraled out of control once Kabe got ahead, but he wasn't a bad player in this series as a whole. He just got abused in game number 3. And honestly, you know, for as bad as Adam's scoreline and his performance and how much he cost his team ended up being, he wasn't the only one who made mistakes in game number 3. Sheo was just in the wrong spot all game long. Like, this was one of the worst Wukong performances I have seen. This was very uncharacteristic, I would say, for Sheo, because he's actually been relatively good all split long. This was easily one of his worst performances of the year, and obviously it came at a really bad time. I think overall for BDS, you got to be upset that you weren't able to pick it up here. Obviously, your winter split is now done. You weren't able to beat Astralis. You fall out in 7th place. That's okay. I mean, it's still better than anything that you were expecting going into the year. Even making it to group stage is more so, I guess, a positive than maybe what a lot of people were putting you as. You know, number 10, number 9 at best, probably in a lot of people's power rankings. To see you come in and be, like, potentially a top 4 or 5 team for parts of the regular season, even if you don't necessarily carry that into playoffs, is, you know, it's good. It's a positive sign. Hopefully this team can continue to grow. I just know that it can probably feel disappointing with how good this team looked for a majority of the regular season, to see your bot lane not really be able to step up and play well in an important series, to see a player like Adam, who has genuinely been great in the top side, really have a poor performance to knock you out. It can be a little bit frustrating to see those parts of the map not necessarily perform here, but BDS is still young. Obviously, this is a team that has played together a considerable amount of time. Adam, Sheo, Crowny have played together a considerable amount of time, BDS Academy last year, and so I still have a lot of faith that this team is going to get better, and hopefully when we run it back here in the spring split, they're going to be fine. As for Astralis, it's now time for them to move on. They are 1 series away from being top 4 in the LEC. Isn't that absolutely insane? If they can take on Mad Lions and take them down, this is legitimately a top 4 team in the LEC, and if you would have said that to me or basically anybody else pre-split, I would have laughed at you, but here we are, so let's see if they can get it done. And we're going to see right now, because we're going to jump into that final series of the week here, and to determine our final top 4 team, we had Mad Lions taking on Astralis, and Mad Lions gets it done. No upset here. We did get one in Group A, not so much here in Group B, as Mad can get it done in 2 games where they are honestly just the better team. It really was apparent this was a pretty huge skill gap between a team like Mad and a team like Astralis, so it's really, you know, I would say it's almost comforting to see Mad be able to perform at this level. This is a team that has been surprisingly consistent over the course of the year so far. You look at them on paper, especially this bot lane, and you're like, you know, there's gonna be some games where they're not so good. Mad, I think for the most part, I think you could genuinely say has been the most consistent team in the LEC. And I do think that that has lived up to expectation here. They maybe don't have the high highs of, you know, G2 or what Koi was able to do last week or what Vitality was able to do in the regular season, but you pretty much know what you're going to get out of Mad. They're not going to drop games to a team like Astralis, and that's what we got here. A really, really solid series from them. Game number 1 was just kind of everybody doing well, but you gotta shout out Elyoya. I mean, he makes Maokai look ridiculously broken, and Maokai is ridiculously broken, but it's worth noting, we've seen people play Maokai, like, a lot over, however many games he's been played in all 4 of the major regions in the NACL, all these games that I cover on this channel. It's not often that you see Maokai, like, genuinely just destroy the game. I mean, really, as strong as the pick is, we haven't really seen it dominate in the way that I think it can. Elyoya changed that up in game number 1. He made this pick look giga broken, and it was a really good series from him overall. It was a really good game 2 as well, but game 2, in my opinion, the 25-minute win, it was more of a stomp, which we'll get to, but it was more of a team win, I would say, overall. Chasey looking really good on the Fiora in the top lane, creating a lot of side pressure, creating a lot of advantages for the team. I think Chasey has actually stepped up a lot in the group stage here. He was kind of in the regular season, in my opinion, easily the most, I don't want to say forgettable, but the least important member of the team to their wins a lot of the time in the regular season, but he's been really good in the group stage. He was really important in their series win over Astralis earlier on in the group stage. He was absolutely crucial to that, and he's really good in this one as well. So, Chasey's doing really well. I thought the Zoe was actually a really interesting pick here. I know a lot of people are a little bit lower on Zoe as a champion, but I quite like it, especially coming in with the Vi, with the Fiora, with the Varus. You've got damage, you've got side lane pressure. Adding something like Zoe that can, just kind of burst you from a mile away can really make Lucian's job a lot more difficult, and you have a way to hit Gwen now. Like, you have a way to actually deal with the Gwen, which is positive, and then Karzi and Hylissang played really well in game number 2 as well. Obviously, Elyoya was good. Overall, it just felt more like a team effort, I would say, for Matt in game 2, where game 1, it was like, wow, Maokai runs the map, huh? So, for me, Elyoya is going to get player of the series. He's honestly been a little bit of a background character for Mad Lions over the course of the year, which is kind of surprising, but Niski's been getting a ridiculous amount of resources in the mid lane, which, I don't think a lot of people expected going into the year, but he has absolutely made the most of it. We talked about this last year. Obviously, Niski was more of the support, and Elyoya was more of the carry. You would have Niski, sacrificing a lot of lane stats in order to make sure that he could roam with Elyoya, get him really far ahead on something that he could snowball the back half of the game on, and then you would have some consistent team fighting from Elyoya in the back half that Niski could supplement. It's kind of been the opposite this year. Well, Elyoya's been on the Maokai and the Vi and the Sejuani and things like that are really there to make sure that Niski can get super far ahead, and Niski is dominating in basically every single recognizable category in the mid lane. I mean, he is top of every CSD at 15, GD at 15, kill percentage, jungle pressure, like every single trackable stat Niski is leading in the mid lane right now, and it definitely shows. These two are just on a different level when it comes to cohesion and synergy, and I think that really is the big part that gives this team the consistency that they have shown over the course of the the first split here. And then for Karzi and Hylissang, we know how talented they are as players. It's really good to see them both click and work together. I've already talked about it a lot on this channel, so I don't feel like I need to get into it a ridiculous amount here, but Karzi and Hylissang are very, very solid, and they were really good again here. Hylissang made some interesting plays in game number 1 on the Nautilus. Definitely some engages that did not work out, but for the most part, he was still pretty solid, even on the engager. Mad just looked very cohesive as a team. They looked like a team that deserves to be in top 4, and I'm definitely am proud of this team to say that they're moving on into that. As for Astralis on the other side, though, definitely not the worst end to your split in the world. I mean, this is a team that should, by all intents and purposes, be 9th or 10th at the very best, right? Like, they don't have the talent to be able to keep up with a lot of these other teams, but they do way overplay their talent level, which is super impressive. I do think they still have a lot of flaws, but credit to players like Kabe and Jonghoon, who I think just continue to be awesome. Jonghoon had some bad moments in this series, but you're going to have some bad moments when you're playing Nami from behind. A lot of times you're just not going to be all that useful. Kabe's positioning was stellar in this series. He almost won game number 1 for Astralis, basically by himself. Big credit to the Lucian. Without Kabe, Astralis is in a really bad spot this split, and it's honestly been really impressive to watch, but the rest of the team, unfortunately, just didn't pick up the pace. Finn was okay in the top side, not really a problem. It was the jungle mid duo that really just got outplayed. Of course, you're going into one of the more cohesive, I would say strong units in the entire league right now in 113, or I'm sorry, in Elyoya and Niski. 113 and Dior not necessarily able to live up to that. Dior's going to get my dud of the series here. Obviously, the Sylas game 2 really stands out as a poor game. The Ahri game number 1, he just was doing no damage, not really doing anything. Everfrost Ahri just not particularly high in terms of priority right now. I know Dior plays a lot of these, more assassin-oriented mid laners relatively well, but it just wasn't working out in game number 1. And then game 2, obviously, he's got that notorious play of dashing in. I just assume he thinks he has a stopwatch. He does not. Gets hit by a Zoe bubble and just dies instantly, and the game is now over. Like, these are the plays that he has just made all year long. He makes a lot of these, and it's just, I don't want to rag on him too much because he's 19 years old, incredibly young. He's basically only played pro for a year. And this is a lot of expectation to put on a player like that. I've talked about this. I think you hear a lot of discussion and talk about how we shouldn't rag on Dior and we should give him more time because he's so young and he doesn't have, all the experience yet. I agree with that. I just don't think you're helping his development at all by having him play at the LEC level. Like, I don't think you're going to get him to the level that he could be at as a prospect if he just is the worst mid laner in the league every year, right? Like, when does he start to grow from that? Because it really isn't happening right now. Going up against Niski and getting absolutely destroyed is not helping him develop. It's not helping him grow. I think he needs more time in the ERLs. He's the biggest weakness on this Astralis team that is genuinely overperforming, and I think that shows. 113 was pretty bad in the series as well, completely out-jungled by Elyoya. Awful game number 1 from him. A better game number 2, I would say, on the Trundle, but still zero pressure. He just didn't make nearly as many major mistakes, in my opinion. Overall, it was the jungle mid duo, in my opinion. That was the big, I guess, anchor for Astralis in this series, but you know, Astralis, for the most part, still really happy to just be here in the first place. Finishing 5th, 6th in the split is absolutely massive. 6th place, technically, because, you know, Vitality had a better record than them when they beat them in the regular season. But finishing 6th place, that's a dub, I would say, for Astralis. Top 6 is absolutely a dub for Astralis. Hopefully they can build on this. Obviously, Kabe and Jonghoon have been awesome. If they just continue to be consistent, this team's going to be fun to watch. 113 definitely felt like he got better as the split went on. I still don't think he's a fantastic, you know, jungler by any means, but he's certainly not, like, a huge, massive hindrance like I think me and a lot of other analysts thought he was going to be going into the year. Finn has had some moments where he has looked really good in the top lane, has some moments where he hasn't looked good. I think really the biggest question mark, the biggest weakness that this team has for me is Dior in the mid lane, but he has had moments where he's looked good. I just think the consistency is absolutely not there. Overall, Astralis is still a good team, just not good enough for top 4. Mad Lions is good enough for top 4. This is a team that I really, really do like. I'm not exactly sure what their ceiling is. I think that this is a team that is probably consistently over the course of the year going to have a high floor, low ceiling. That's kind of what I've seen from them. Not that they don't have a ceiling. Players like Karzi and Hylissang can really pop off in a lot of these games. Obviously, Niski is really, really good. Chasey's had some good moments. Elyoya can win any game. But I just don't know if they have the talent to compete at like the highest level to win the LEC. But this is a team that is very consistently going to beat the teams that they should. And that alone is something that you have to commend when it comes to Mad Lions because, you know, compared to a lot of other LEC teams, you just don't have that. So congrats to Mad Lions, you've made top 4. We now have it locked in, and it's time to go over the top 4 and what I think will be happening next week. Alright, that is going to do it for my LEC Group Stage Round 2 overview and analysis of all 4 series that we had here up on your screen right now. Instead of any standings page, we are now entering the playoffs in the winter split. So up on the screen, you're going to see the bracket and how it has formed. Of course, winners and losers has already been separated. Koi and G2 winning their groups are in winners. SK and Mad making it out in second in their groups are slotted into losers. So I'm actually going to do what I have done for every single playoffs video. Usually I do a full playoff primer and I do all this, you know, all pro and everything like I did last split, but you know, with the LEC kind of being broken up into smaller portions, I felt it was a little bit more appropriate to do it at the end of this video rather than have its own dedicated video. I will say one thing that I'm not including here is my all-pro votes. I will be making a YouTube short and a TikTok that kind of goes over those, so stick around and keep updated for those because, you know, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I'm going to be putting those out. But let's go ahead and give my predictions for how the top 4 is going to shake out here in the LEC playoffs. Let's start off with Koi versus G2, our winners matchup here, the 2 teams that won their groups in the group stage. And, you know, both of these teams obviously coming off of 2 very different regular seasons. G2 always being kind of considered a favorite here. Koi definitely, you know, starting the season as a favorite, really underperforming, kind of finding their footing as the group stage went on. I feel pretty confident about this one. I'm going to give the edge to G2. I'm going to have them move on to the finals. I just think they're slightly more talented, slightly more efficient with how they've been working right now. I think that Koi in general relies a ton on Comp and Trimby in order to win a lot of these laning phases. And Hans and Mickey have just been phenomenal this year, and I feel really confident that it's going to be relatively difficult for Koi to generate the same kind of leads that they generated against a team like Vitality against G2. Not to say that they can't. I still think that the series is going to be interesting and fun to watch, but I would give the edge to G2 certainly in that matchup. And then you've got your losers bracket matchup. So obviously G2 moving on to grand finals, Koi moving on to losers finals to play whoever wins between SK and Mad. Now this is a really intriguing matchup. This is the one that I feel the least confident in picking in this entire bracket because I really could see this going either way. But I think surprising some people here, I'm going to pick SK Gaming to pick up the win in this series. I think Exakick is the best player in the series, and I know that's a bold statement to make with how good Elyoya and Niski have been, but You know, Marcoon and Certus have not been bad by any stretch, and Karzi and Hylissang are certainly a bot lane that can get abused when they play from behind. We've actually seen that this year. They're not particularly great at losing resources and being able to come back and be relevant, and I think Exakick and DOS have actually been really consistent at being able to generate those leads, and so I have SK winning this series. I think it'll be very close here, definitely not an easy one for SK to win. Like I said, if Mad were, you know, to win this, I didn't give my little stretch there for Koi G2. I think my prediction for the range for Koi G2 in particular is going to be G2 in 4, and then I think you can move that in either direction. It could be G2 in 3, it could be G2 in 5. I think they should be the team that wins, but I don't think it will be easy. I think Koi should put up a little bit of a fight, and if they took it to 5 or hell even sneaked out a win, I wouldn't be entirely surprised. I just would favor G2. I think my range for SK and Mad is going to be SK in 5, Mad in 5. I think really this is a battle between two teams that are really close in terms of skill level, and it's just going to be about which carries pop off more. Is it going to be Xkick and DOS on the side of SK? Is it going to be Elyoya and Niski on the side of Mad Lions? Whoever ends up having a better series is probably going to win. And for me, I'm going to predict that to be Exakick and DOS, but if that was Mad Lions in 5 or in 4 or whatever, I'm not going to be particularly surprised. A very fun matchup here that I'm very excited to watch. Probably my matchup of the week next week. And then, of course, losers finals now. You've got Koi versus SK. We saw this matchup in the group stage. Koi was able to take it relatively easily because their bot lane is strong. They didn't give up a lot of resources to Exakick, and SK couldn't really find other avenues to be able to generate a lot of leads in the late game. I do think it'll be relatively similar here. I have Koi moving on to Grand Finals, which means G2 and Koi 2 group winners moving on to Grand Finals. I know it's a little boring, but I do think they are the two best teams in the LEC right now. I think Koi in general is a pretty bad matchup for SK, even if they do have a lot of really good talent. I think the way that Koi plays the game is pretty anti how SK tends to win a lot of their games, and so generally speaking, I think Koi should have the advantage. My range here is going to be Koi in 4 or Koi in 3. I think they should just be the better team, and they should be able to move on and be able to win the series without a lot of trouble. And that brings us to our G2 Koi Grand Finals. I don't think this one will be closer than the first one. I really see a lot of the same analysis. G2 should be able to win Grand Finals here. My prediction going into Winter Split playoffs, Winter Split finals, is that G2 is going to be hoisting the Winter Split trophy. I think they should just be better than Koi again. Very similar. G2 and 4, I think, would be my prediction in either direction. I think G2 is just the better team. They're more cohesive. I think their bot lane's been awesome. They have Caps, who's not even popping off right now, but if he has like a couple good games, if he's just better than Larson, I really don't see a lot of avenues for Koi to be able to win. Their top side's been good as well. Yike has really shown up and been incredibly expressive. We all know how bad Malring is from behind, and Yike is really good at generating leads, and so overall, I think G2 should be favored there, and they are going to be my official pick right now as we head into top 4 to win the Winter Split. I know it's not controversial in any way, shape, or form, but you know, I gotta stick with what I truly believe, and what I truly believe here is G2 hoisting that trophy. But that's gonna do it here for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed the overview and analysis of the group stage. Hope you guys enjoyed the preview here of the winter playoffs and my predictions. Let me know what you guys think of those down in the comment section below. Who am I overrating? Who am I underrating? Do you guys think there's gonna be any crazy upsets? Do you think SK or Mad could potentially be making grand finals? I think that would be pretty shocking to a lot of people, but I certainly don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to happen. I just don't know if I'm gonna predict it myself. Let me know you guys' thoughts and feedback, of course, down in the comment section below. Leave a like if you made it this far in the video. It really does mean a lot to the channel, and it shows me that you guys are not only enjoying the content that I make, but specifically the LEC content that I'm making. Obviously, it's a little bit of a competition between regions. If you enjoy one region more than the other, feel free to support that in the like button. And then, of course, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button. Not only do I do LEC coverage, I do all 4 of the major regions, as well as the NACL every single week. So if you're looking for a comprehensive LoL esports overview, this channel is the one for that. But, of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.